Can you elaborate just a little bit? You said refinancing is a little bit more subjective than what somebody's going to pay for it. In your experience, I mean, can you quantify the variation there at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's more subjective in the fact that they're picking comps, right? So if you, let's say you've got 100 properties around yours, they're evaluating which ones are more like yours. And sometimes they just pick ones that are just okay, right? And they're not great comps, but you can shape that narrative. So you can shape the
Right.
narrative by sending them the comps that you want them to evaluate, right? And you can say, this is what I think that it's worth. And you're trying to argue the high end because usually they're going to argue the low end. So it gives you a little bit more room in the middle. So I've had multiple students with appraisals come back that were, let's say they wanted, I'm thinking of one situation, they expected it to come back at 130. And it came back at like 103, which is just crazy. Like the difference there, if they've done their homework, and they had, the difference there is just weird. Like that's not a trivial thing. And so when you get the appraisal, you look through the appraisal and you've got 4 columns. You've got your property and then the other 3 properties that they're comparing you against. So you can go look at those properties. You can pull up the pictures and say, is this or is this not like my property? Right. And so you can look at the pictures. And so in some circumstances, they pull comps for properties that the property condition is not even close to your property. Your property is newly rehabbed. It's got new paint, trim, siding, all of that. It's been completely redone. And these other ones they're comparing them to are in questionable shape, right? And maybe they're the same year built, but they're not the same quality, right? Or another thing that they'll do is that in this particular situation with one of my students, they pulled comps. His house was built in 1987, and they pulled comps between 1920 and 1940, right? And so he said, that's just not, it's not even close to what my house is. In fact, the new builds that are at $140 a square foot are closer to what my property is than those 1920 properties. And so he said, these are more justifiable comps. These are much more reasonable comps because those are not actually an accurate representation of my property. And it came back and his appraisal was 140. They adjusted it to 140. Now that doesn't happen every time. You can't convince them of everything every time. But if it comes back and it's just off, most of the time, I'd say the majority of the time, you can get them to adjust it to within a reasonable range. Maybe it's not the number that you wanted, and not always are they going to come back over your estimate, but they'll adjust.
Okay.
Every now and again,
Cool.
you get a stubborn appraiser though, and they say, no, I'm not changing anything. And then you've got options, right? You can either leave it with that appraisal. You can ask them to adjust theirs. If they say no, then you can order another appraisal. And some lenders will say, we don't take a second appraisal. And in that case, I say, well, let's just find another lender then. And if you're working with a mortgage broker, they will find another lender. If you're working directly with the lender themselves, which is more common on DSCR loans or commercial loans, then you just got to go find another lender and get another appraisal run.